one of the most frightening things I've seen recently has been the suppression for so long of any debate on whether this coronavirus actually leaked from a lab in China. Now, that was so clearly an obvious supposition, because here was a modified bat virus, a virus originally from bats, 2,000 kilometres away, that suddenly pops up in Wuhan, in China. And it looks like no bat virus before it, and is perfectly adapted to kill humans. And it first appears on the very doorstep of the Chinese lab in Wuhan that works on exactly these viruses, making them more lethal. What are the odds? Yet most of the media, including our ABC, demonised for a year anyone who suggested this theory, shut them down, because Trump had voiced it, I suspect. And worse, Facebook, which has 11 million Australian users alone, actually banned comments suggesting this virus was man-made or came from a lab, which is exactly the theory that many scientists now admit could actually be true after all. Even newspapers that once poo-pooed it, now erase it, like the Washington Post, New York Times. Joining me from London is Brendan O'Neill, editor of the online magazine Spiked, who's written brilliantly on this. Brendan, thanks for your time. First, explain exactly why this supposition was shut down.
I mean, it's such a shocking story, as you've just outlined there, because essentially what we're talking about here is that for the past few months, Facebook has essentially been shilling for the Chinese regime. That's really what's happened. This vast social media network, which has 2.7 billion users around the world, was censoring things that could potentially be embarrassing to the regime in Beijing. That's what happened. It was censoring anyone who said that the virus was potentially manufactured or man-made or may have leaked from a laboratory. So it was actually globalizing Chinese-style censorship and silencing people around the world who would potentially ask awkward questions about the Wuhan authorities and the Beijing authorities. This is the situation we're now in. We're in a situation where Silicon Valley, the supposedly woke oligarchs of Silicon Valley, trust the Chinese communist regime more than they trust their own citizens to have free debate, and that's really shocking.
I think that's really shocking indeed, and I suspect the same sort of thing is occurring in debates on global warming, the same sort of demonisation, refusal to face facts. Brendan, the woke culture, the deplatforming that we see. King's College London has apologised to staff for sending an email with a picture of the late Prince Philip at the opening of the university's library. He was there with the Queen in 2002. The Duke had actually been a governor of this same university. Hey, there's a clue in its name, since 1955. But the Associate Director, Jolene Clark, now says, sorry to staff, she sent them a message. We have come to realise the harm that this caused members of our community because of his history of racist and sexist comments. We are sorry to have caused this harm. Was this apology necessary? Because in newspaper coverage of this, I've seen pathetic attempts to list his supposedly racist and sexist comments. Honestly, what a joke.
It's a complete joke. I mean, this is such a mad story. I'm sorry, but if you are offended by a photograph of the Duke of Edinburgh, the man who was the Queen's husband for so many decades, then you have no business teaching at a university or working in any serious job, because you're obviously so fragile and so pathetic and so snowflakey that you can't even handle seeing a photograph of a very important public figure of the past century. This just demonstrates that our universities are being run by children. They're being run by people who cannot even handle a photograph, never mind difficult ideas or controversial discussions. I think this is utterly perverse. King's College should seriously think about changing its name, and university administrations across the UK need to grow up.
Yeah, change it to Cringe College, maybe. Honestly, Brendan, you've tempted me dangerously, mate. I'm reminded of Nietzsche here, that maybe the woke culture is the revenge of the weak of intellect against the strong, because they don't want to hear anything that they can't argue against, because why would you want to shut something down that you could easily rebuke? I really wonder if it's the revenge of the mediocre.
You know, I've been thinking along the same lines myself. I mean, what's happening is that these institutions are increasingly being run by people who are clearly not deep thinkers, because if you're a deep thinker, then you can handle difficult discussion. You can handle controversial ideas. They're clearly not deep thinkers. They don't have much of a backbone. They faint at the first whiff of controversy or someone who goes against everyday orthodoxies. I actually think they could learn a lesson from the Duke of Edinburgh, because he himself suffered racist jibes. He was called Phil the Greek. He was often referred to as Stavros, including by the sainted Princess Diana. And he brushed all that aside and carried on with his public duty and got on with his loyalty to the crown. They could learn a lesson from the Duke of Edinburgh rather than running away from his photograph.
Well, actually, they've got two reactions, haven't they? One is to shut you down, and if you're not shut down, to cry in front of you and show you their wounds. I mean, the classic example of the week of intellect. Brendan O'Neill, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.